This is Just Say HIE, the official podcast of the Hope for HIE Foundation. I'm Betsy Pilon, your host, bringing the stories of the HIE community from around the world to you, our listeners. Hope for HIE is a nonprofit organization and the largest collective of HIE families anywhere in the world, and each story across all outcomes has its own version of hope to share. Join us as we explore each unique journey and connection. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Just Say HIE, or Just Say Hi. I'm excited to introduce Melanie Riggins. She is a longtime volunteer with Hope for HIE and a mom to Zoe and Maisie, Zoe, who is her HIE kiddo. And if you've seen our Awareness Month graphics, templates, or our Holiday Appeal graphics, Melanie has been instrumental in helping us out to help us look good. So Melanie, thank you for joining us. And I'm really excited to have you on this podcast and talk through your experience with HIE.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
So let's start in the beginning, so people can learn more about, your start with HIE and, the experience that you've been through.
Right. So in 2013, Zoe was born. At 40 weeks, I was induced on my due date. I had a very uneventful labor and delivery, and Zoe was born pink and screaming and healthy. She had high APGARs. They were 8 and 9. And that changed 12 hours later when in the nursery she began having seizures. Thankfully, we delivered in a hospital with a level 3 NICU. So she didn't have to be life flighted. There wasn't a really big chunk time of separation. And she was right where she needed to be. It took them a few days to get her seizures under control. And then they performed the MRI. And then later that afternoon, we were taken into one of those small, stinky rooms off the side of the NICU pod, like so many of us. And that's when they told us that Zoe had suffered a severe hypoxic incident sometime before or during birth. They couldn't tell us how, when, why, and just that she had severe grade 3 brain damage. They told us that it was very, very grim, and that if she even lived past the weekend, that she would have little to no quality of life. They said she wouldn't walk, talk, see, eat, hear. And, I had waited my entire life to have children, and I was absolutely devastated. And that was the first time we had heard HIE, because they gave us the written MRI report and handed us an outdated pamphlet on HIE that was from like 1985 and sent us back to our room. And the following 24 hours, I was in a very, very dark place. Finally, the next evening, my husband looked at me and said, "You know what, babe? She's here right now and she needs us." And he was absolutely right.
So as you went through the NICU, I love hearing about, Zoe is a gorgeous child and from the get-go has that movie star quality to her, certainly. So as you were moving through, how long was your NICU stay and what was discharge like as you were getting ready to head home?
So we spent 17 days in the NICU, and each day things started getting a little bit better. Zoe can't see. No, Zoe can see. Well, I bet she can't hear. Zoe can hear. She kept passing all of her tests. Well, I bet she can't eat. Well, you know what? Zoe breastfed like a champ and bottle fed like a champ. So she just started turning a corner, and we started seeing hope. We had a team of 2 neonatologists that were in and out. We had a team of therapists. And then we also had, because Zoe was, one of the biggest babies in the NICU, we had a lot of nurses come down from the other floor because they heard about this baby with the Angelina Jolie lips that was in the NICU, and they all just wanted to come down and see her. She kind of always has attracted that sort of magnetic energy about her. the SLP came in to the room where I had just finished pumping for her. And she came in and she said, I was just telling everyone in my class, trust the patient, not the paper. Because the paper is not everything. The paper only tells a picture of a moment in time. It's not the entire story. And, I really hung on to that a lot in the NICU in those really, lonely, isolating first days, because I chose to just love my baby and believe in everything that she was showing me. So after 17 days, we were discharged from the NICU, and the doctors told us to just, wait and see. And they had no explanation for her turnaround, for the fact that a mere 2 weeks ago, they told us, she might not live past the weekend. And then here was this child that was doing all the things that they said she wasn't going to do. And we left more confused and more scared and more traumatized than anything.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest ones is you get home and you don't have nurses around, you don't have monitoring equipment many times, and you go, now what? How, we've left the safety net. So what was your experience, getting connected to community resources and, getting connected to the HIE community?
The first year I spent a long time fearing neurologist appointments, running from a cerebral palsy diagnosis. And, those early days, what I really felt the most was like that feeling of, if she would just get this milestone, then she's going to be okay. If she'll just walk, do you think she's going to walk? She'll be okay. And I really wish I, and retrospectively, had not put so much pressure on the if she would walk bit. So in that first year where I was sort of a physical therapist, a speech therapist, and an occupational therapist, and also a full-time worker by day. And then by night, I was this mom that went on endless Google searches, searching for HIE and kids like mine. And Google searches really were turning up very little for me. I got a lot of medical studies, and then there was a little girl in England that came up. And because I was searching, I think, severe grade 3 HIE, whatever medical document they sent me on my way with. And so I was really having a hard time understanding, again, what is our future? Because she was always kind of just a little bit behind. She wasn't, she wasn't whatever they told us in the NICU, and it was really confusing. And about a year and a half into our journey is when we finally found hope for HIE. And finally, I knew that I was home. Finally, I could see that there was many outcomes across all journeys, that there were many families, there were many moms just like me that, were just looking for support, that were just it was just a place where I could ask endless questions that I had about feeding difficulties and, oh, she's doing this. Is this weird? And it was just an overwhelming feeling.
And I remember you joining and seeing you post for the first time. Tell me about that.
One of the first things I can remember was I posted sort of my intro story. And I remember distinctly you and Adrian and Lindsay, some of like my HIE mom tribe people, ride or dies, and Crystal all responded to me. And you were kind of all having sort of this similar journey. Our kids were all at similar stages. And it was instantaneous friendship. It was, it was just like, oh, wow, I finally found my people. And the best part of it is that over the years, our kids have sort of grown together and we've grown together, even though we're not, we don't see each other every day. We're super connected. And, you guys are my ride or dies. There isn't anything that I wouldn't do for you or your kids. And it's just an incredible, incredible resource that I couldn't live without.
So We call a lot of times this like the in-between in HIE, where it's not significant enough sometimes to qualify for services, but there's still stuff going on. And then trying to get what you need for your child can be difficult. And it sounds like that was part of the experience that you had.
She was developing on the later side of normal with her milestones. She was not delayed enough to really sound off any alarms, but she was delayed enough in certain areas for concern. But she wasn't yet qualifying for a CP diagnosis. And then she was also starting to age out of her hypoxia diagnosis and the qualifying code for insurance purposes. So it was just a really difficult time managing therapies and trying to figure out how to get her, what she needed. And then she also still had these abysmal EEGs, but no seizures that we could see. I put so much emphasis on those early milestones that that other things were sort of slipping through the cracks, things that were actually out of my control, but also, really just trapped her in this in-between life. When she was 2, she still had no words. And we were hitting roadblocks with insurance covering speech therapy. And we went back to our state intervention program because insurance just wouldn't accept her as something that they saw was emergency for concern. And then so actually that transition into the state services was a great transition into pre-K. And I highly recommend anyone who's doing private therapy early on to really go around age 2 back to state services anyway, so you can complete that transition into pre-K.
Yeah. So you kind of go through this first, 3 years. And I know that I feel like it's changed a little bit since our kids were babies, but the emphasis was so much on physical milestones. And then you kind of, and a lot of it is just because you can't tell, and there's not like a ton to be done until you do get further along and see, because the variety of what's normal or typical is so far reaching in domains like speech. And so I know, transitioning can be very difficult, but, the service model changes as well. And part of the, difficulty, I think, with, what you just touched on was qualifying, but then not qualifying here. So talk about transitioning into pre-K, because that's only a 2-year period before you transition again into the K through 12.
Right. I mean, the transition periods really hit you hard, especially when you're in the in-between, because it's that whole thing you were just saying. You qualify, but you don't qualify, but you qualify or you don't qualify. And it's sort of like a blink and you'll miss it sort of thing. But if you really, really look, you can really see the challenges and the discrepancies there. So she was, all of a sudden she was turning 3 and it was time for her first IEP meeting, which is that big IEP meeting you have before school begins. And I remember that it was my first introduction to just hearing the list of the missed milestones and the areas she needed to be worked on and how just far she tested below the typical average age. Because I think in, that 0 to 3 area, you live in that gray area with your specialists, right? Your specialists are on your team and they're saying, oh, she's going to get there. Or, and they don't really give you intentionally, the grim prognosis stuff, or they don't really hold those milestones under a microscope. They kind of let your child just be. And then you go to the IEP meeting and you hear this long list of milestones that your child actually has missed. It's frustrating. And then I also remember it was overloaded with all of these acronyms and this just jargon that I didn't understand. It felt like I was sitting with a group of people that were speaking a different language. And most notably, I sat at that table feeling like I was just invited to sit at the table and that these teachers were the experts of my child, but a child they hadn't even met yet. They were knowing my child from the piece of paper. And then I thought back to my earlier speech therapist in that NICU that said, look at the child, not the paper. And those words continue to follow me in that whole experience in the IEP world.
Yeah, and I think that's a very common experience, unfortunately, of feeling again that you're at the table, but you're not kind of in the role of an equal partner at the table. And it's your child, and you know them best. And I think, it's really important for parents to understand that there are ways that you can bring, your unique and amazing and in-depth view of your child to that table to help everyone come together for the goal is to have that common purpose of seeing the whole child and having those different insights at the table. But if you've never met the child and you're only seeing what's written on paper, then there's a lot of preconceived notions with what, the potential might be, what services and supports might be appropriate, and seeing, and kind of projecting like this path before they've even stepped foot in a classroom.
That first meeting is a super difficult entrance into the IEP world, but parts of that meeting are still true today. And Zoe is in second grade, like just that feeling of maybe you don't know my kid yet. And we're making decisions about, especially like every school year, when every school year begins, we feel like that. We feel like you're making a lot of decisions, but you don't know my child yet. But so in my experience with IEP, in pre-K especially, the teachers and the specialists were the experts. I would come to the meeting. I would bring everyone favorite snacks and favorite drinks. I would show up with a tray of goodies. I was, I kind of like prided myself on being that mom that showed up with everyone's favorite snacks. And then we would go over Zoe's progress and we would laugh and cry together. And it, it was just like this major like moment. And, it was always a great experience for me. And you spend, 2.5 years with those people generally. And so everyone, you do feel like after a few meetings, people do know your child a little bit, and you do have that relationship, and the meetings become a little bit easier, even if you still feel like they might be the experts on your child. And synonymous, but parallel to preschool was Zoe's journey to an apraxia diagnosis. So while she was in preschool and sort of figuring out how to do the preschool thing, she was finally diagnosed with apraxia and began intensive prompt therapy. And she ended up having to learn to speak syllable by syllable because of the low tone in her mouth. Her tongue never reached the correct position to form early patterns of speech, essentially. So a big part of her school journey is that delay with speech and how it has sort of made a mixed expressive receptive language skill, which is a huge barrier and roadblock to her success at school. And that's really started to become more and more of, her journey.
It is just so overwhelming and so much as you go to prepare to move through these transitions, and especially as you approach kindergarten. So let's talk more about that.
So we were lucky enough to go to preschool in our home school, which was, for consistency, the best thing that could have happened for Zoe. So she started at that school when she turned 3, and when she was 5, she went to kindergarten. And we had an awesome kindergarten teacher. She was in the gen ed inclusion class. We had an awesome teacher and co-teacher, and this teacher believed in the inclusion model. On the first day of class, when we had our parent meeting, she sought me out. She stopped me from leaving and said, I have a list of ways that I think Zoe is really going to rock kindergarten. And, so not only had she learned who my child was from the preschool teacher and had that experience with her, but she applied it and said, I have a list of ways. And then she said, what do you want for Zoe to learn this year? How do you think Zoe's going to be successful? And right away, that really established an incredible relationship, an incredible respect. And, I was room mom and I was super involved in that class. And, we still brought snacks and laughed and cried. And, it was a great experience.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's so important, that relationship and having that moment where you're on that team for your child and seeing that people are invested like you hope everyone is on that team. So I know after kindergarten, things get a little bit different sometimes. Like that's a little bit where people start saying that, the rubber meets the road and you're through like the, entrance to just getting used to how school works for a lot of kids. So talk to me about how, I know Zoe is just finishing out second grade now. How have the past 2 years been as you've, gone through the school system?
Right. So, after I think the end of kindergarten into first grade was where it really started changing for me. I had her last IEP meeting, and that was the first IEP meeting where I was sort of blindsided. They talk about blindsiding in IEPs, and that was my first blindsiding experience. They said, "Oh, we just got approval from the administration. She can repeat kindergarten if that's cool, and you can have a summer program." And it was the first time where I really had to say, this doesn't feel right to me. Can you show me the data that thinks that she should repeat kindergarten? Because she looks like she's learning. She at least has the first 3/4 of the material. And really what was going on was her disability, her mixed expressive language disorder was affecting her comprehension, but not her ability to understand her material, but the ability to let other people know that she understood what she understands, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many expectations of kids. So, if you have a child with an expressive language difference, disability, delay, all the Ds, I mean, what are the other ways that you can assess comprehension? You kind of sometimes have to get creative and look at meeting the child where they are and going, okay, well, we know this about this kiddo. So let's look at how we can, she's not fitting in a box. That doesn't mean that she doesn't have a great potential to learn and comprehend. We just have to be a little bit more creative. So can you talk through, I know that this was like a lot of work that you have invested in getting people to that point after that conversation happened. And what kind of strategies you've used over the past 2 years to get everyone on the same page with what Zoe needs and her ability to prove herself to people.
Yeah, I mean, prove herself is absolutely correct. That work really never ends. It's an ongoing journey as we all kind of move through the experience together. The reason why that kindergarten meeting was so important was there was definitely a switch in my advocacy. I realized I couldn't be the mom that brought snacks to meetings. I had to be the mom that was confident enough to say, I don't agree with this decision, and believe in my kid enough and what she could do to say, I think she does understand, and that we are not seeing like the forest for the trees here. I think that she can say what she's reading. She just needs a little bit. We need to change up how we're asking her the question. And, I had to disagree with a teacher that I thought was awesome. And, and in retrospect, I understand that she wanted to give her just more time to develop that skill. And she really did believe in her. From there, when we went on to first grade, I'm a very visual person. I'm a graphic designer. So what I like to do is I like to make a one-pager on my child, because IEPs are 68 pages. We all know that. And so I come prepared with a one-pager on my child, and I say, this is who my child is. This is what she is working on. And more than anything, she is not her disability. You have to see who she is in order to reach her. And she will call your bluff. If she does not think that you can see her, if she does not believe that you are seeing her potential, she will not perform for you. She will not. I mean, she really just won't.
Well, and I think that brings up such a good point. Kids know, like they're kids,
100%,
but they can feel if someone believes in them or doesn't believe in them. They can feel that and they vibe off of that energy. And one, I think it's always important to remember when we talk about assessments in particular, And this is something that I have heard from neuropsychologists. I've heard from pediatric neurologists. I've heard from neonatologists, pediatricians, the whole gamut. Kids are not performing animals. They do not do what you want them to do when you want them to do it. As we know, being parents,
Absolutely.
put on your shoes, get ready to go, like eat your breakfast. And if they are in a situation with a stranger, with someone that's bringing their own bias or energy to it, they're going to react to that. And that is also cognition, right? Mm-hmm. Because they are feeling that interaction out.
For sure. And it goes back to trust the patient, not the paper. Trust the child, not the IEP. My child is not her IEP. She is not 13 different parts. She is not just all the things she cannot do or she is working on. She is a whole child. And I think one of the major roadblocks in early education and in those IEP processes and meeting every new teacher every school year has just been to get them to understand that she is not who you think she is right now. And also, she does not have the time for you to try to figure out who she is. Because if you want to spend 3 months getting to know my child, you're going to miss opportunities that she could have excelled otherwise.
And that is so frustrating because it shouldn't take 3 months to get her into the groove. She's missing learning during that time. So let's switch gears a little bit. I know that we want to talk about communication. So tell me about, that journey a little bit.
I mean, I think that communication and overly communicating is one of the best things you can do in the education process. And I've really gotten to the point where I don't care who I annoy or who I offend. I will send multiple emails. I will request over communication. Because some of the major pain points in our educational journey so far have come from when I sort of hung back and said, oh, you guys are the experts. And when those experts, maybe didn't do things correctly, could made some incorrect choices, I had to say, you know what? No, I am the expert in my kid. She's trying to tell you this.
Yes. Sometimes I feel like, we as parents, feel bad that we're, might come off aggressive or offensive if we're asking for regular communication updates. And I know, in my own experience with Max and in first grade, when we hung back because of different situations that were happening at the time, that's when things did go awry and we had to backtrack and, fix things later on because they weren't going well. It's okay. You're the parent. You're allowed to have those conversations and ask for those regular updates. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit to talk about, kind of the nuances of the experiences that we both have had with teachers pushing for more of a segregated setting or on their terms versus what would be best for our kids.
I think that there comes a time in this in-between world where you're constantly fighting for inclusion. You're constantly fighting for your child to have a seat in that classroom and be seen with her peers. Because we all know that being with typical peers really helps development and goals. And that's something that I always advocate for. But I do feel, especially in first grade, where the rubber meets the road, that it really began the year where I felt like they were trying to stick baby in a corner, so to speak. I think I really started to get the impression that they wanted to move her into an intellectual disability classroom or the like. And because it was easier for them too, not because particularly for Zoe, but they were just focused so much on what the paper said and not on my child.
Yeah, this resonates so strongly. We had a similar experience as we transitioned into kindergarten where the resource teacher at the time sat down with us and said, okay, well, we're going to start pullouts when he gets into kindergarten. And this is what works with my schedule and this da-da-da. And I had to stop and I said, okay, but in this is an individual education plan. And the person that's at the center of this plan is Max. It's not you. It's not how you deliver services. If it makes sense for him, that's best for him to be pulled to your room for supports. And that makes the most sense, like for his academic needs, then let's talk about that. But Max should be at the center. Zoe should be at the center. The kids are at the center of this. And scheduling is not their issue. It's not the child's issue.
Right.
Placement is not the child's issue. Yes.
I always say that sounds like a you problem, not a Zoe problem.
Absolutely. And so, you go through and you go, okay, well, is it because he's not getting the right supports?
Within the school system, finding your kids' cheerleaders and holding on to them for dear life is important. I'm somewhat of a collector. I collect teachers and therapists and specialists. If I love you and you love my child and you see my child, I'm keeping you for life. You will always be a text message away from me. I will ask you things. I mean, I texted her pediatric PT a couple weeks ago, like, hey, what do you think about this? They're just people that see your kid, that understand your child, and they're there to be your child's cheerleaders, particularly within the school environment.
Well, and a lot of times they also have that rich history of seeing your child develop and in different ways than perhaps a teacher that's there for a year and then you move on doesn't get to see and hasn't experienced. They don't have that context of your child.
Right. And then so, when things got a little bit dicey in first grade, and a lot of those early IEP meetings were trusting those voices at the table that had known Zoe since they had seen her around, obviously, when she was in preschool. One of them had worked with her in preschool, but one of them just knew of her, but had worked with her in kindergarten. And those people that have that sort of longer history of Zoe, offered up really good points. They really were empowered to say, maybe we should do this, or maybe we could do that. And they've just been an integral part of her journey at school and that whole process.
Well, and, I think that's an important thing to remember, though, as a parent and especially in the U.S., when we're talking about education law and rights and disability rights, with education, you have the right to bring whoever you want to that IEP. And
I think you should, always.
Yeah.
Even a family member. You should always have someone there that can sort of relay everything that happened, because as a parent that you're so close to it. I mean, I went through 6 IEP meetings just crying, and just crying after every single one and not remembering anything, like just total blackout. So it's great to have another person.
It's very overwhelming. I mean, especially like when they're doing assessments and they come back with data and you're trying to analyze and set goals, and having someone else that can be a sounding board. One of the tactics that I was told was helpful and that we've used a couple times is you can ask during the meeting to take a break and say, I need 5 minutes. I'm going to go out in the hall. We're going to just like recap for a minute and take a break. And that can help too. So in case there's like a really tough section of the meeting, you're able to understand and take that moment to process. And you can always call other meetings. A lot of families don't understand that just because there's an annual IEP doesn't mean that that's set in stone for the whole year. You can go back and say, hey, let's touch base and have a reconvene within the first 6 weeks of school and see how things are going. And does what we have on paper, what we guessed from last, the end of the school year or the beginning of the school year, does that make sense? Or they're doing better than we thought with this and they're accelerating. So we can kind of step back on these services, or we might need to, put this and try this in a different way. It's a organic and constantly, it's a living document and a living process. It's not set in stone. Here's this. And a lot of times I think families just are not told that, or it's not communicated well enough.
So certainly I think that those kinds of important details are buried. I think another thing that's very useful in the IEP process, which I learned at the end of first grade, was the parental concerns section of the IEP. That is another huge part of the IEP that I think is probably typically underutilized. And, I drafted a 3-page letter of my parental concerns for the school year, and, very clearly outlined who my child was and where she was at and what she needed to be successful and what she did not need in order to be successful, and was able to attach it to that living, breathing document. So I think that, things like being able to take breaks and reprocess, things like being able to attach your letter of parental concerns, bringing your own PowerPoint deck, or, I once brought a video recording of Zoe reading because I thought that her reading data did not match where I thought she was truly at. So just remembering the you really know your child's best. And once you stop bringing snacks to the IEP and realizing that they are not the experts, that you are the expert and you deserve that seat at the table, that's when the IEPs start to become actual meetings of progress, where you do start crafting an IEP that has measurable goals for your child. And while the results might not always be, here nor there, you still start feeling more comfortable advocating for what needs to happen.
Yeah, I really want to encourage families to feel empowered to be the coach, right? When you're the coach, you're assembling the team, you're encouraging the team, you're helping the teammates see things that they might not see in themselves or in other people, and teaching them how to work together. You can be that, even if it doesn't feel super comfortable for you as that being your baseline personality. You can step up, and it doesn't have to be adversarial. It can just be approaching it in that way and saying, listen, I'm the coach. I'm not only coordinating this team, but I've got this other team over here. And for us as parents, typically we're coordinating school stuff and medical stuff, and we're the conduit between the two. So we have that really important link, and really should feel that we are in that coaching role, that we're really building and encouraging and growing these teams with the purpose to positively impact our star player.
Right. And I think that, especially in second grade, once I kind of really understood how to flip that and turn that around and make it so that, this team was servicing me and my child and getting Zoe to be where she needed to be, it was so much easier to advocate and to say, show me the data on that. Where do you get your data from? And, it really enabled me to ask more questions and ask them more confidently when I did not believe that they were really the experts at the table, but just also people that were on the same team as my child. And then, I think one of the other key things I discovered this year was, instead of having these huge IEP meetings, what I have found very helpful is having monthly smaller meetings where, it's not, I'm bringing my lawyer. It's just a conversation about my child with all the people that are on her team. So if we could all work together and use the same language and the same support in every aspect of her day, in every, quote, unit of her day, then watch how she's going to soar. She's going to feel that. And sure enough, here Zoe is soaring again. But it's just unfortunate that in her history, we spend most of the year flailing about, and not communicating. And then she's got to turn on the jets in spring. And I would love to know what would happen if we would just start together in August and say, this is my kid. This is her. She's an awesome kid. This is how I'm going to support her. Much like her first kindergarten teacher said to me, I read your child. I see your child. I talked to her teacher last year, and this is how I'm going to support Zoe in my class this year in meeting her goals. Because I feel like, yes, there are 24 children in your class, but there's only one Zoe.
Yeah. And I think that point of transition is one that is so important from year to year. And not just, because I think that was one of the most difficult things for us that lacked between kindergarten and first grade was kindergarten had this really great method that everyone was on board. So it was very cohesive. And then I said, okay, so is everyone going to get together and transition that knowledge? And it really didn't happen. Or maybe the person was not receptive and didn't want to be told how to, teach this child, when it's, for us as parents, and we kind of see this, broader view of our child, if you don't have that cohesive team approach, and you don't have this, nice transition of knowledge and implementation of it, then your kid steps back because you're recreating the wheel that has been working. Let's not recreate the wheel, right?
Correct.
Let's keep this wheel that we know works moving forward. And when everyone is taking that cohesive approach, of course, the child is going to do better because they are used to. You don't have to get used to 13 different approaches. You're used to one approach that works best.
Exactly. And that's kind of the most frustrating part of that, the school process is you go through an entire year sort of fighting your battles or, being in lockstep with a really awesome teacher, or your kid turns a corner and then all of a sudden it's over again. And you have to start all over again in the fall.
We're now at this point where we've learned so much over the past couple of years of getting ahead of that and saying, you know what, he's going to need to come in before school starts and see his environment. He's going to need to feel comfortable knowing where the bathroom is and knowing the, meeting face to face with the teacher and seeing that school environment. If there's a student with any vision accommodations, you got to have the vision consultant to go into that room and see that it's not overwhelming and that their placement is there to help best accommodate those needs. Any of those specialties that are affiliated with that child, whether it's mobility and orientation or assistive tech or any of that, needs to be done ahead of the school year starting. So they don't, like you said, have this block of time that you can't get back, and they can hit the ground running and feel really good that they're not waiting for something that they were used to having and succeeding with in the prior school year.
And I think earlier I was doing a lot of huge PowerPoint decks and one pagers and things, trying to wedge in that continuity of care, right? I was trying to be the keeper, the historian of all that knowledge, and supplying it to every member of her team. And, now that has not shown to be the best way, I think the best way is insisting upon that first meeting, before school starts or within the first 2 weeks of school, to say, hey, everyone on Zoe's team, this is Zoe. This is where she finished last year. This is what she's been doing during the summer. Let's look at that data really quickly. And let's talk about, what do you think? Who do you think my child is? What do you think the best way is to teach my child? What do you hope that she's going to learn this year? And asking very important questions up front. I think rather than leaving it until the first 9 weeks of school and finding out that your child is super far behind where they're supposed to be, and just totally sometimes they've said that, oh, it's just, she's too far behind. We can't, it's beyond the point of recovery. So, not leaving those conversations till the first 9 weeks of school would be a great idea, because after the first 9 weeks, that is time my child is not going to get back, and she just can't get back. And she also shouldn't have to be forced to get back, right? You're doing a giant disservice to her by just trying to get to know her, when we could have had a meeting at the beginning of school and decided collectively where she is and what she's working on and how she fits into your class. I wanted to do this chat today because I really want to empower other parents to be a little bit more like Betsy and like Melanie, to ask questions at the table. The truth of it is that HIE is the unwanted gift that we just keep unwrapping. Every year, especially in this early education stage, it's like we're unwrapping a new diagnosis or unwrapping a learning disability or unwrapping, a visual situation. Like things just appear slowly as the child is cognitively growing. I mean, this, your life can change at any moment in this process. And really being able to advocate for your child, say what they need, claim your seat at that table is really what I want all parents to really understand that they can do. It's in their possibility.
I use this example a lot. It's like getting trained in CPR. You never hope to use it, but goodness, if you have to, it's better to have that knowledge than to not. And being aware of possibilities, allows you to better help your child and set them up for success. Learning disabilities don't mean that your child is not going to have a wonderful, fulfilling, meaningful, purposeful life. There are accommodations and strategies and all sorts of things that can be wrapped around and taught to kids to help them, but they might not be the traditional, 2 + 2 = 4 that the school system has been set up to do.
Right. And that's kind of like a standard curriculum, some of our kids can really excel with. Zoe does pretty well, just to, below typical second grader now level. But it's getting her to reveal what she knows, getting her to that space. She has splinter skills, like her skills are not all even, just really understanding that you shouldn't keep a child in a box because of maybe you haven't found the right modification or accommodation for them. A really good example is that, my kid was currently decoding at like an 86% for second grade phonics, yet her reading level was like a level F because she couldn't move on because of her expressive receptive language disorder. She couldn't answer the questions in the way the curriculum dictated the teacher have to complete the data, right? So it was the construct was actually keeping her down so she couldn't grow. And some of my advocacy this year was about saying, hey guys, how do we change what we're doing so Zoe can show you what she knows, because she's going to get bored. If she's decoding it at 86%, trust me, she's understanding the word. She's an excellent reader. And this is really her superpower. So why aren't we letting her use her superpower, use it in front of her peers, and really feel like she's succeeding? And so in this world of the in-between and kids with HIE, you really have to figure out creatively how best they succeed. And sometimes it's not just one thing. It's a multiple different things and multiple different times. And it's tricky.
Definitely. Well, wow, we have covered a lot of ground and have touched on so many wonderful tips and tricks and tools and strategies of how to set up teams for your child, how to navigate difficult conversations and problem solve if things aren't going how they should be. And I'm just so grateful for, all of your insight that you've shared today, obviously for all that you do to help support the Hope for HIE community. It has been such an amazing journey to see Zoe, grow and thrive and to see you in your journey of parenthood. And so I'd love any final thoughts you'd like to share with the HIE community.
It's my honor and my privilege to be a part of it in any way I can. I love, making graphics for you guys. And I really just believe in this organization and where it's headed.
Well, Melanie, thank you so much again for participating and joining me in this new podcast endeavor that we're starting. It's been an absolute blast today, and we look forward to hearing from you more in the future too. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Love being here.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Hope for HIE's official podcast, Just Say HIE. If you have a story you'd like to share, be sure to keep in touch. Learn more about the work we do and sign up for our newsletter on our website at hopeforhie.org/justsayhie. We look forward to connecting with you soon, and thanks for listening.